Well, I am so delighted that you are here. Welcome to Mississippi's Children's Mental Health Summit. Let me kind of give you a brief context around what we're going to try to accomplish here today. My name is John Damon. I'm the CEO for the Mississippi Children's Home Services. And for over 20 years, I have been attending, like you, many of you, kind of the Meet Me at the Flagpole kind of events for children's mental health. And what I have found over 20 years, when we have those kind of events, it's the same people that meet you at the flagpole, right? Not that I don't love those people. I love them. However, the problem, if we are going to expand our awareness beyond the gathering of the same people at the flagpole every year, then we've got to do something different. And that's what today is really all about. Our goal is to move children's mental health out of the silos that we've been operating in and into the discussions that we're having around the headline issues facing our state: healthcare, education, economic development. And we have the right leaders that are here today to help us do just that. We have an amazing lineup, as you see today, of speakers that are going to help lead our discussion today. And consistent with that diverse leadership that will be speaking, we have the right diversity of leadership in this room. And I just want you to kind of hear, by way of category, who all is in this room today. We have public and private healthcare providers, state departments of health, mental health, education, the Division of Medicaid, private and public mental health providers, multiple advocacy group leaders, multiple public school districts from all around the state, members of various boards of directors, multiple insurance carriers, youth ministers, children ministers, state hospitals, members of the Mississippi legislature, architectural firms, CPA firms, attorneys, Mississippi's universities, youth court judges, professional associations of school administrators, public defenders, aldermen, Attorney General's office, and of course, at the end of the day, we'll hear from our First Lady and the Governor. Y'all, those are the right people to bring into this discussion, to take mental health out of the silos and weave it into the discussions that all of you have around your tables at your business meetings, at the healthcare meetings, at your education meetings. So, we have the right people to change this dialogue, and I am so delighted that you're here today. Thank you so much for being here. The President has declared the month of May National Mental Health Awareness Day and month, and this week Children's Mental Health Awareness Day. And to share some background around this is Ms. Diana Mikula. Diana currently serves as the Deputy Executive Director for the Mississippi Department of Mental Health, and I have been given permission to share. And I'm delighted to share, some of you may know, that in July, Ms. Mikula will succeed Mr. Ed LeGrand as the next Executive Director for the Department of Mental Health. Ed has done yes, let's congratulate. Ed has done a fantastic job, and we are to all congratulate him for his many years of public service, and I know that he's excited to have someone succeed him that's very capable and competent, and here to share with us today the importance of what today is. Please welcome to the stand Ms. Diana Mikula.
Thank you very much. The Department of Mental Health is honored to be a part of this event today with Mississippi Children's Home Services and the University of Mississippi Medical Center. I'm also very excited, as John was discussing, to see the brilliant group of featured speakers. Each of these speakers bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to this summit. Thrilled to see that our First Lady, Deborah Bryant, and our Governor, Phil Bryant, are taking time out of their busy schedules to share in our call to bring children's mental health out of the shadows and into the forefront. As John said, today is National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day. It began about 50 years ago as a way to elevate awareness of children's mental health. Today, we join more than 1,100 communities across the country to raise awareness about the importance of children's mental health so that children may get help for mental health disorders at the same urgency as any other health condition, and ultimately reduce the impact of mental illness on America's communities. Awareness Day seeks to communicate that positive mental health is essential to children's healthy development from birth. This year's national theme is Inspiring Resilience, Creating Hope. And the focus of this year is on the unique needs of young adults between the ages of 16 and 25 with mental health or substance use challenges, and the value of peer support in helping this group navigate through life's domains of education, employment, housing, and access to health care. So if this is your first time to be involved in Children's Mental Health Awareness Day, you see a lot of green. Well, green is actually the official color of National Children's Mental Health Awareness. We use green because it symbolizes growth, support, health, healing, and hope. Green also equalizes and soothes emotions. And green represents peace, harmony, balance, restoration, and well-being. I'd like to just share a few facts about mental health disorders that I think are very relevant to what you'll hear our speakers talking about today. 1 in 5 young people have one or more mental, emotional, or behavioral challenge. 1 in 10 youth have challenges that are so severe they impair how they function at home, in school, and in their community. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among teenagers in Mississippi. Mood disorders such as depression are the 3rd most common reason for hospitalization in the United States. And over 50% of students who have a mental illness end up dropping out of school. There is one person that I'd like to recognize. We have many staff from the Department of Mental Health, but I would like to recognize Sandra Parks. If you'd stand, Sandra. For those of you that don't know Sandra, she is the director of the Division of Children and Youth Services for the Department of Mental Health. If you haven't met her, she's a young lady you need to meet. She and her staff do a fabulous job, and I just want Sandra to know how much I appreciate her. In an effort to support and expand and improve, the Department of Mental Health has been involved with Mississippi Systems of Care for Youth and Children. DMH has awarded 5 System of Care grants since 1999. And over the last several years, the Department of Mental Health has worked diligently with numerous partners, many of you who are in the room today, to change the way that people, especially young adults, think about mental health. We have clearly seen the impact that education and awareness about mental health and suicide prevention can have on our youth. It's now more important than ever to focus on collaboration between agencies and organizations, increasing evidence-based practices, continuing training in trauma-informed care practices, and focus on early intervention and prevention services. So in closing, I'd like to thank all of you for being here today and being part of this summit as we connect healthcare, education, and economic development to children's mental health in Mississippi. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, so much. We're so fortunate to have great folks like you and Sandra and Jake, even Jake, and such wonderful people at the department to lead our state. We're deeply grateful. Again, congratulations to your new appointment. Our first speaker today is someone most of you probably know and admire. Andy Taggart has served a large different roles in his lifetime as Chief of Staff for former Governor Kirk Fordyce. He's been a partner in the state's largest law firm. Has now established Taggart, Rhymes, and Graham law firm. He's been elected as the Madison County Board of Supervisors, where he later served as president there. He served as president and CEO of the Mississippi Technology Alliance and has sought adjunct faculty professor of history and political science, and recently Andy was elected as chairman of the Greater Jackson Chamber Partnership. You know, whether you've seen Andy giving political commentary on TV or perhaps read his book, Mississippi Fried Politics, He speaks, and God's given him a gift to do that. And he leads a large Sunday school class at Broadmoor. And if I did not teach myself, that's certainly the class that I would attend. And over the course of his career, as he's used his voice and his platform to advance a wide variety of issues, all that changed in July of 2012 when Andy and Karen, who's here with him today, lost their son, but gained a new mission. And in our organization, the first core value that we have is that the voice of our children and families always comes first. And I can think of no more fitting way to kick off this summit than to hear directly from the voice of a family. So please join me in welcoming Andy Taggart.
It is the raw brutality of it that has surprised us the most. On July the 10th, 2012, we lost our youngest of three sons at age 21 to suicide. My bride, his mom, found him in the front yard of our home after he had taken his own life. What we did not know was that was on the heels of 1 year of illicit drug use. And I wish that I could tell you that I'm here because I wish to be involved in a ministry or to be more helpful to you in your role, but my motives are not nearly so pure. I'm just an angry daddy interested in spiritual revenge. All of us bring our own faith backgrounds to work with us every day. Very few of us bring no faith background. Almost all of us, some faith background. And I don't presume upon yours. But I must tell you that I can't grapple with the facts of our lives or the horror of what's happened to us outside the context of my faith. So you're just going to have to bear with it for the next several minutes. Doesn't mean I'm a good person or that I adhere to the truths of my faith in the way that I would like to. It just means that none of this makes any sense at all to me except in the context that I will be offering it to you. Most of you are familiar with the stories of Gideon and the prophecies of Ezekiel. You know, Gideon's the guy who had the back and forth with the angel, the fleeces, prove to me that you're really speaking on behalf of God, and then goes into combat against 135,000 troops of the enemy with 32,000 men, and God says to him, that's too many, and he pares his army down to 300, remember? So it's 300 guys against 135,000 troops of the enemy, and then Gideon splits them up into troops of 100 each, 3 troops of 100 each, puts them in the hillside around about, and their weapons are clay jars, torches, and trumpets. And of course, you know the rest of the story, that Gideon says, when I give the alarm, you sound the charge for the Lord and for Gideon, break your jars, let your torches shine bright, sound your trumpets. And the troops must have thought, this is the dumbest plan in the history of mankind. And the enemy falls upon itself, starts destroying itself, and Gideon's troops rout the enemy. So trumpets and torches have played an important part in the history of mankind, but in the history of our faith specifically. Trumpets to announce things, to signal the charge, to embolden the troops. Torches to light the way, to disclose dangers in the darkness, to make us feel brave when we don't feel brave, to seem bigger than we are to the enemy. Remember we used to play the flashlight to the chin deal when you had slumber parties and you get under the sheet and put it makes your head look gigantic. It makes you look like, That's sort of what Gideon and his troops were doing, I guess. So a few trumpets to offer some truths, to sound some alarms, and hopefully to embolden our charge. First trumpet is this: do not fall prey to the lie that if a child finds himself or herself balled up in drugs, it's because he was a loser to start with, or he came from a broken family, or he was abused, or his parents didn't love one another, or didn't love him, or he didn't have any friends, or he was unsuccessful in school, or he failed in sports. None of the above. All of those are lies. Our son was 6'7", with a fro on top of that, so he looked like a giant everywhere he went. And he took the air out of every room he entered. He was good at everything. And that's not just a bragging daddy, although I'll be happy to brag to you afterwards if you want. But he was class favorite all 4 years in high school, which was really irritating to me. I was never class favorite in high school. But he was the life of the party. He was good with mechanical things. He would watch a YouTube video and go take his truck apart and put it back together again. He was always working some entrepreneurial deal. He dug a boat out of the swamp, refinished it, found an old trailer, found an old outboard, made a couple of $1,000s on that. My deal with our guys was that each of them would get a vehicle Christmas of his junior year of high school, but that was to take him all the way through 4 years of college. So you do whatever you want to, take as good a care of it as you want to, but this is your mom's and my contribution to your transportation needs through college. By the time Brad got done, he had traded up 3 times with no additional money, had a far more valuable vehicle than we had originally given to him. He was just good at everything, especially hunting and fishing, which is a big deal in my household. Those of you who are duck hunters know it's a lot of work, especially when you try to take children duck hunting, because there's just so much gear and stuff. And we had 3 boys, and so we were losing gloves and forgetting guns. It was way more like work than fun for me until they got to be teens, and then it got to be really fun because I made them do all the work. And then it got to be really fun because Brad got so good at it and would decide how the blind ought to be situated and how the decoys ought to be laid out. And then the ultimate for duck hunters is who calls the shot. Right? When the ducks are coming in, who calls the shot? And he got to the point where he was the guy that called the shots. And that's when I knew he was hunting on a different plane than I was. So I say all that to say, it is a lie to believe that just because a child has gotten his life balled up with drugs and is paying the price of the consequences of all of that something was wrong with him to begin with. And here's an alarm. The alarm is Brad was engaged in illicit drug use for a year, and we didn't have a clue. Now, your first reaction might be, well, then you weren't involved enough in your child's life, or you missed a lot of. There's always telltale signs, and if you'd just been more sophisticated or more engaged, it's a lie. In fact, all 3 of our boys were in Oxford that last year of Brad's life at different levels of school. I wouldn't have given you a nickel for the chance of that happening, but that's actually what happened. And their mother bribed them to go to church by saying, if you go to church on Sunday, we'll buy lunch on Sunday. And so they had my debit card number, not hers. And they actually enforced it. They would run one another off. If one of them showed up for lunch and had not gone to church, he didn't get lunch paid for. And my point is, his brothers were also intimately involved in his life, and they didn't have a clue. I heard so many buzzwords in Brad's essay, comments and sentences, and perhaps even word for word things that you've heard before in your work. It's debilitating to us. I believe that God has provided a means by which we may enjoy victory over death. And Karen and I believe that Brad is in God's presence and that we will see him again. I believe Satan knows that also, that he's lost that fight, and that he may no longer toy with our son. But what has happened is debilitating to those left behind. And those who suffer from mental illness and are still physically alive are every bit as debilitating to their families and friends and co-workers. Isaiah 63:9 says, "In all their distress, he too was distressed and saved them by the angel of his presence." What an amazing thing. We believe we serve a God whose heart breaks when ours break. The Greeks believed, if a God could be touched with human emotion, he was no God at all. But our faith teaches us that God's heart breaks with ours. And in ways that you will not even know, because most of you don't even know us personally, you have been the angels of God's presence in our lives. The encouragement and sustenance that we have gained from other people has been extraordinary. But we have been distressed, we've been heartbroken, we have been brutalized, and now we are determined that we will try to be a part of figuring out some way to redeem this, just as surely as you are in your own careers and ministries. So let me offer 3 final ideas that it strikes me, although you and I might state slightly differently, we would be in virtual unanimity about as the terms of engagement. First of all, we have to understand what is the nature of the battle in which we are engaged. It is not a battle for boardrooms or committee meetings. It is a battle for warriors. The Outlaw Josie Wells may be the best movie ever made. It's way too long. But every time it comes on, I turn it on and Karen rolls her eyes and leaves the den. I love Clint Eastwood. I really love The Outlaw Josie Wells. You remember at the end of the movie, it's just about to be curtains for Josie and his little band of peasants. The little grandma and the little waifish blonde-headed woman and the old Indian guy. And they're in a little adobe hut that the grandmother's son had built and left behind, and the Indians are all around them, and it's about to be all over. And so Clint Eastwood is sort of giving them their last instructions. And in one of the great quotes in movie history, he says, "Just remember, when things get really bad and it looks like you're not going to make it, then you got to get mean. I mean plumb mad dog mean. Because if you give up and you lose your head, you neither live nor win. And that's just the way it is." So we first have to understand the nature of the warfare in which we are engaged. It is warfare for warriors. Second thing we need to recognize is we're not called to park our brains at the door. It does take some brain power. You may or may not agree with me on this particular point, but I believe God as sovereign knows everything, including my very thoughts. I do not believe Satan knows my thoughts. So I believe my brain is a weapon against him. I loved all 3 of the Indiana Jones movies, but The Last Crusade, the one that Sean Connery was in, was, I guess by almost everybody's account, the best of all. And you remember Indy and Dr. Jones, his daddy, Sean Connery, it's about to be curtains for them too. This is a recurring theme in Hollywood, right? They're on the beach. The Nazi pilots are strafing them, and one of them is blowing up, but there's one pilot, and he's gone around to make a bend, and Indy's revolver is empty, so they have no means of defense, however meager. And the pilot turns around, and just as he's about to make his final approach and mow him down, Dr. Henry Jones, Sean Connery, takes his umbrella, runs down the beach, and shoos some seagulls up off the beach, and the seagulls fly up into the airplane. The airplane crashes into the mountainside. And Indy is agog at what his father has just done. And Dr. Jones holds up his umbrella and starts strutting back across the beach and says, "I suddenly remembered my Charlemagne. Let my armies be the rocks and the trees and the birds of the sky. Use your brain." And then the third thing is, and when I talk about spiritual revenge, this is the one that I must tell you, I'm not a brave man by nature. So I must muster this every day. And some days I'm well enough to muster it up, and some days I'm not doing so great. But the third thing that I will leave you with is we must show some brass. Take the fight to the enemy. Stop waiting for when the assault will come, because it will come. I also love the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. I don't have the steely-eyed glint or courage of Clint Eastwood and Josie Wales. I don't have the charm or boyish good looks of Sean Connery and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, but I'm at least as flawed a character as Johnny Depp in Captain Jack Sparrow. So in the second of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, Keira Knightley, the gorgeous British actress, plays the character Elizabeth. She is about to proclaim what we've always known to be the case, which is she's crazy in love with Captain Jack Sparrow, the roguish pirate, right? And so everybody's abandoning ship because the Kraken, the giant sea monster, is on the way to kill Jack Sparrow because Jack Sparrow tried to double-cross Davy Jones. You have to see the movie for it to make sense. The rest of this you'll understand. So everybody's abandoning ship into a lifeboat, and Keira Knightley and Johnny Depp, Captain Jack Sparrow, are on the deck, and she lays a big old sexy kiss right on him as she handcuffs him to the mast. And she says, "Jack, the Kraken is not coming for us. He's coming for you." And she sadly turns and gets into the lifeboat, and they all paddle off as Jack Sparrow is manacled to the mast. And the sea starts to boil, and the ship starts to rock, and he's trying madly to get away, and he sees a lantern, a coal oil lantern over there, and he uses his saber and is just able to get the sword under the tip of the handle, and he picks up the lantern and pours the kerosene onto his wrist as a lubricant and works as hard as he can and rips his hand out, and he's free just as the nastiest monster in the history of cinematography emerges from the ocean. Tentacles and slime and rows of teeth and a Jabba the Hutt kind of a tongue. I know I'm mixing movie metaphors, but and he burps up Jack Sparrow's tri-cornered pirate's hat. He apparently had eaten it in an earlier venture. Jack picks it up and knocks off the slime and puts it down on his head, and the beast is just about to take this big bite to end it all. And Jack Sparrow draws his saber and points it straight ahead and says, "Hello, beastie," as he runs headlong into the monster's mouth. The battlefield is not in the boardroom. The battlefield is out where people are hurting and crying and dying, some of whom we live with every day and don't have a clue. I'm no great brave soldier or warrior, but I'm determined not to sit back while he brings the fight to me. And I'm so encouraged to know that there are people like you who have long been engaged in taking the battle to the enemy. My bride and I are grateful to you for the time this morning and for your service and ministry to our community. Thank you.
Andy has an engagement. Let me say this as you head out, Andy and Karen. Thank you for your passion, for your transparency, and for your zeal to win this fight. We are in this fight with you. And as Genesis 50:20 says, you intended it to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. That's what you're doing, and we are honored to have you. And Karen, thank you so much. Let's thank Andy one more time. So that's why we're here today. That's what it's about. And Andy has set the stage for urgency about why we must get this right and why we must weave the topic of mental health into our everyday discussions to win that fight. So that's what we're about to do. Let's begin with our speakers. We're going to begin with healthcare and how children's mental health is a critical public health issue. And then after Dr. Buttress and Dr. Elkin speak, we're going to take a break. And we'll pick back up promptly at 10:30, where we will kick off education and how children's mental health is a critical education issue. Hear from Dr. Hank Bounds. We'll be followed by economic development, and children's mental health is a critical economic issue. And following these presentations, we'll segue into lunch that will be hosted by our First Lady, Deborah Bryant. Thank you for being here. And at 12 o'clock, we will hear from our governor on Mississippi's innovative practices leading children's mental health, advancing healthcare, education, and economic development. If y'all are like me, I'm pretty emotional right now, but let's use that in a good way to create some change. And I am excited about today. So now I'm going to change gears without the clutch. All right, y'all join with me in that. And I'm excited to introduce to you two champions for children, Doctors Susan Buttress and David Elkin, that are going to walk us through linking healthcare. And I'm supposed to put pictures up, and I apologize. There's Andy. And I kind of think he did have the boyish looks and all of that, that he mentioned. And I knew I had a kindred spirit with him. Everybody that works with me can tell you I reference everything in movie scenarios. So Andy and I are just like that. That's good. So anyhow, back to task. Dr. Buttress is a professor of pediatrics and the chief of division of child development and behavioral pediatrics, and the medical director for the Center of the Advancement of Youth at University of Mississippi Medical Center. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics and is board certified in pediatrics, developmental, and behavioral pediatrics, and is also the host of a radio show I love to listen to, Relatively Speaking, on Mississippi Public Broadcasting. Joining the discussion after, and Dr. Buttress, you're welcome to come on up, but joining immediately following Dr. Buttress will be David Elkin. Dr. Elkin is the professor of psychiatry and executive director of the Center for the Advancement of Youth at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. He received his doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Memphis, completed his internship and postdoc fellowship at the University of Oklahoma Health Science Services Center, and he specialized in pediatric psychology. He joined the Mississippi Medical Center in 1999, and in 2012, he and Dr. Buttress started the Center for the Advancement of Youth together. We have recently joined in a partnership with them that announced this collaboration a few weeks ago to integrate behavioral health and primary health care and help families experience a seamless healthcare system. And it has been a great joy to work with Dr. Elkin and Dr. Buttress in that preparation of that exciting new initiative. So please join me in welcoming first Dr. Susan Buttress.
Okay, I'm moving over from the podium. Wow, what an act to follow. Oh my goodness. I've decided my part in the three big issues, the nature of the battle and it's a warfare for warriors. I'm going to be the grandmother, okay? I've got that role already. I completely get what Andy's saying. I have to tell you, to me, he outlined why we need to work so hard. What I want to talk to you about first, before David comes up, is to go over a little bit of why we are so energized about the K Center and the collaborative that's going on and how important all this is. We are talking about this from a bit of a different end from where Andy was talking about his gorgeous, incredible son that he lost. His son was lost due to drugs, which is another whole issue that Sandra Parks and her group, I know, works very hard on. the war on drugs is a war we're still not winning yet, but we can. Our issue is to look a little bit at another issue from the very beginning of children. So what we're going to do is remind everybody in this room this statement: it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. This is not just tugging at your heart, it's the honest truth. And I'm going to show you a little bit. Before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about two of the many patients that I've seen in my practice over the last 28 years. Mary and Anna came to see me when they were 2 and 4 for the very first time. They were in foster care. It was a kinship foster care, and they came to live with their great aunt after they had been taken away from the mother, who had mental illness and who also had drug and alcohol use. She was a prostitute on the streets, and the children were largely in playpens or car seats their entire life, from 2 to 4. They were sexually abused. And one thing I forgot to mention is that mother used heavy alcohol during pregnancy also. So when they came to me, we diagnosed them with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Both of them had ADHD. One of them, the 2-year-old, had a sensory neural hearing loss, severe, that had never been diagnosed before. So these children I've followed for the last 10 years. They're doing well. They continue to need very close follow-up. They are both on more than one medication, and they've been in behavioral therapy for a very long time. The maternal aunt, luckily, is a wonderful person. She stayed with them. They've been very difficult, but she has stayed with them to take care of them and be the one. They've received services from us and from the mental health centers and from many others over the years. So what we need to do is not let this keep happening. These are 2 children who had a bad start from the very beginning. They really almost didn't have a chance, and the reason they're surviving now is because one woman stepped up to take over. Now, there are a lot of risk factors for child abuse and neglect. This came out of Mayo in 2010. You can read them. I think it's pretty obvious. If there's mental illness in the family, domestic violence, stress, poor education, substance abuse, all of this increases the risk of children not being treated correctly from the start. There are protectors for that: social connections, parental resilience, good knowledge of how to parent, concrete support, and then a child's social emotional development. So when we're talking about getting together and working on children and being a good collaborative, if you read over these again, this is all of what we hope to do. And this is what, hopefully, I believe everybody believes in this room we need to do. Now, there's some things we all know, and I'm just going to point them out one more time. We need to remember this. We are not where we need to be. Mississippi often is at the bottom of the list on several things, but it's not just Mississippi. This slide is probably difficult to read, but this is relative child poverty rates. Can you see where the U.S. is? It's at the bottom. It's right before we get into third world countries. We are not doing well by our families and children. Everybody knows about Mississippi and poverty. Again, this is Mississippi, the 25% or more individuals who live in poverty, children in poverty. Mississippi is one of those states. You know that. But the whole state is not impoverished. There are pockets of poverty. The dark red is where the highest rates of poverty are on this slide. So we know we've got pockets of poverty. We know there are certain areas that we need to help. We know that there is racial disparity there. The upper two lines are the Black and Hispanic races. The bottom line is the white race. So 9.9% of whites live in poverty, 27.4 and 26.6% of blacks and Hispanics live in poverty. So we've got a ways to go. We've got a lot to fix. Here's some other data that we've got to fix. So if you look, this is a map that looks at domestic violence and the rate of domestic violence by population. So in Mississippi, we had 4.33 in 1999. So that was a long time ago. That was per million of population. Then look at the change. Now I'm going to go back. Now the red states had the highest rates of homicide in domestic violence. But look how it changes. So everybody went down around us. We did not go down in 2003. So why is that? Infant mortality rates. We know that we have a problem with infant mortality. Some of that has to do with the poverty rates. There are racial and ethnic disparities, but a lot of that we know relates to the poverty rate disparity, right? So the other thing that happened in Mississippi that is continuing to contribute to our issues, everybody knows this, is Hurricane Katrina. And then what happened after that, just to hit us hard one more time, was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Now, I'm not a whiner. I'm pretty resilient. And I think Mississippi people are very resilient. But you know, we keep getting hit. That's okay. We can get back on our feet and do it. We just heard a man and his wife who are incredible and who are obviously very resilient, but are back on their feet trying to help. So these are the core stories that we need to remember. Child development is the foundation of communities, prosperous communities. Brains are built over time. Genes and experiences together build brains. It's not just what you have at birth or prior to birth, but it's the experiences too that happen. Cognitive, social, and emotional development are inextricably entwined. They build us all together. And toxic stress damages brains. Okay, so why do we care about the earliest part of children, of their development? Look at what happens to the newborn brain. It's 333 grams at birth, and 999 grams, triples its size by age 3. The wiring of the brain also is very different from the beginning until around age 3. And this is what, but it doesn't end there. I just want you to know how important it is. So at birth, we have all these neurons, just a big, huge cluster of neurons. And then what happens is the pathways start developing and the nerves start connecting. And then gradually, as you use those pathways that are connected, then what happens is we begin to prune away all the extra cells. So if you don't use it, you lose it. Brain growth over a lifespan, some of us in this room may be getting a little bit worried because we're starting on the edge of that dip, if you see. So what happens is the brain really does grow, and it continues to grow even after one's a teenager. And in fact, actually, it's not, the data's even better than this particular slide because there's some fairly new evidence that even old brains can continue to grow and improve if we just keep using them. So, just to reiterate, the mind is fine-tuned during childhood. It's not just nurture and nature, but it's even more than that. It's what's happening to the child. Experiences, nutrition, emotional stressors, and other things make a big difference. This is just another good example of a head scan of a 3-year-old. One is a normal 3-year-old, the other is a child of extreme neglect. You see the huge difference in the brain. That means that child on the left side of the screen is a child who is going to have long-term problems. So just a quick 2-minute coverage of the Adverse Childhood Event Study. It's called the ACE study. I hope several of you in here have heard of it. If you haven't, please Google it and look and see more about what it is, because I don't have time to completely go over it, but I just want to tell you a little bit about it. The ACE study looks at the whole life experiences of individuals, and it was a progressive study that uncovered how bad adverse childhood events are on the ultimate outcome of adults. It was a CDC and Kaiser Permanente collaboration where they looked over 17,000 people who were involved, and they looked at the different experiences that these individuals had gone through over their lifespan. You see the breakdown there. Most of them were white, but there were also Hispanic, 10% Asian, 10% black, half and half men and women. Largely educated, okay? So this is not talking about a very impoverished group. This is talking about a largely educated group. 1 of 4 of those individuals were exposed to 4 categories of adverse childhood events. And what we're talking about are parents who had substance abuse, mental illness, violence in the home, poverty, and several other things. 22% were sexually abused as children. 66% of the women experienced some sort of abuse or violence in the home or family strife in childhood. This was huge. A huge number of these individuals who came from basically middle-income families had negative events that ultimately affected their lives. The higher the ACE score, the more adverse events the individuals had, the greater likelihood of severe, persistent emotional problems. But not just that, also health risk issues, serious social problems, and adult disease and disability. So I'm not just talking about children who come out misbehaving and needing to be on medicine or in therapy, but this is long-term effects, stuff that affects adults all the way until their death, which, by the way, they had much poorer life expectancy also. So, higher ACE score, significant rise in chronic health conditions, sexually transmitted disease, COPD, liver disease, and so on. Also, a higher death rate. If you see this, if they had 0 ACE events, 60% lived to be 65. If they had 4 or more ACE events, less than 3% lived to be 65. That's huge. So from conception to death, this chart just shows you adverse childhood experiences are the basis of everything that happens after that. In the majority of times, not always, sometimes there can be another indicator that disrupts things as they go up. And you heard that from Andy Taggart. So we have scientific gains, we have a deeper understanding of the appreciation of the complexity of development. It's not just what they start with, but what they are dealt with after that also. Early relationships are very important. Early life experiences and genetics can create the being that you end up with as an adult. We know all this. The ability to change brains decreases over time, okay? We have an emergency in our hands. We can make a huge difference in Mississippi if we remember that we have to start really before conception to get age-bearing adults healthy, people who are bringing children into the world healthy, and then to make sure those babies who are brought into the world, that they are brought into the best possible world we can give them, because we don't have a lot of time. So if we invest early, then we can make a big difference later, right? So this is a reminder in the end. The percent of brain growth, remember how quick it is and how early it is from birth to 3? But look at our percent of public spending that is typically spent on children from birth to adulthood. So we spend more on the end rather than in the beginning. So what we need to do is put more energy at the beginning so we don't have to spend a lot of money at the end, right? So we may not be able to prepare the future for our children, but we can at least prepare our children for the future. So now, Dr. Elkin, David, is going to come up here and tell you what our plan is, not just for the two of us, but for everybody in this room, because you are all going to eventually be part of the collaborative. I promise we are going to bug every one of you to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Buttress. I appreciate it. John did well because he told y'all that you have a break right after I talk. So I have a clock ticking and I know it. Let me start off and summarize just a few points that she made that I hope you take away from all this. Healthcare and behavior are intertwined. So how a person does medically and how a person does social, behavioral, emotional, psychological, those things are all intertwined. Because, as Andy Taggart reminded us, God made us whole. We're physical creatures, we're emotional, we're soulful creatures. All those things work together. And that's why everybody in this room needs to work together. It can't be done just by a psychologist, a physician, a social worker, one or two departments in this state. It has to be everyone working together for the good of the kids of this great state of ours. All the data that Dr. Buttress presented are behavioral in nature. And I want to give you a few examples here in a few minutes. But everything that she talked about, all those difficulties we have in the state and the nation, those are all behavioral data. If you've been around me for more than 5 minutes, you've heard me say, behavior is anything a dead person doesn't do. So behavior encompasses everything. So when I say behavioral, don't think depression or anxiety or something like that. Behavior is what we all do as humans. But those things are intertwined, healthcare and behavior. And I think that one of the main points of this meeting today, this summit, is to get us all thinking that way and to encourage us as we work together to address the problem in our kids from different dimensions, different ways. Let me give you all some data. And I'll talk about a few conditions that are behavioral and health intertwined right in front of you so you can be thinking about them. So you know in our state we have just under 3 million. That's less than Houston, Texas. So my wife's from Houston, and just so you know, we are a pretty rural state in case you didn't know that. My dad is from North Attala County, outside. They went into Kosciuszko. That was a big deal. So this is a rural state. We have about 750,000 kids under age 18. We're consistently ranked, as Dr. Buttress says at the bottom, in terms of healthcare delivery, in terms of health delivery systems. The primary presenting problem with pediatricians across the state are behavioral problems. And I think you all know that. Everyone in this room knows that. The main thing that brings caregivers and their kids into the offices of an MD are behavioral problems. And what we're looking for is comprehensive behavioral care from everybody in this room across the state. So let's talk about a few of these issues right in front of us. I threw up 5 examples just to sort of as a small sample to talk about and have y'all thinking about it. High school graduation rates, obesity, teen pregnancy, ADHD, and autism spectrum. So you can see the high school graduation rates, and they're holding at about 62%, okay? It's been steady since 1990. We're consistently at the bottom of this. Now you may wonder, well, if we just give more money to education, which we need to do, if we just give more money to teachers, which we need to do, we could fix all this. But a lot of the issues that keep kids from graduating from high school are behavioral in nature. A lot of the things that keep these kids from getting the education they need to become self-actualized, productive citizens of this state, to then better the state for their kids down the road, are behavioral issues. And so when we're talking in this room about how do we manage mental health care, how do we manage behavioral health care, I promise you, if we can get that nut cracked, if we can figure out that scenario, we're going to see a change in high school graduation rates. How about obesity? And again, you know, the rest of the world loves to pick on us about who we are. I like to say that, you know, we may be the fattest, but we're also the happiest. I mean, you know, people in Boston don't know how to make cornbread like my grandmother does. But you can see the numbers, and the numbers are disturbing in terms of overweight and obese numbers of kids, especially in our state. That's holding them back. Now, you may think that's entirely medical. It's also behavioral. It's issues that these kids face from their families, but mainly from the world around them. And again, as Dr. Buttress pointed out, a lot of these issues that we're facing here are linked inextricably to poverty. It's very difficult for me to tell an overweight teen in our clinic, you need to eat healthier, you need to drink water and eat fruit, when they live in a grocery desert, somewhere, let's say, in the Delta. It's a very difficult thing for me to tell them to do that. The trend is stabilizing in Mississippi, and I quoted our colleague, Dr. Mary Currier, the Department of Health. We've making some progress. We haven't taken a downturn. We haven't gotten any better, though. Teen pregnancy, again, a behavioral issue. Teen pregnancy is an issue. This is from the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. There are 55 births per 1,000 teens in Mississippi. It's the highest in the U.S. And again, this may be leveling off. So again, if you take anything away from this, know that the state is trying to make some progress. But again, I hope you see that some of these social, medical issues are behavioral in nature. And so when we talk about healthcare coming together with behavioral healthcare, we're talking about very large issues that the people in this room can affect over the next 10, 20, maybe even 5 years if we pull together. ADHD. Nationally, the trends are about 3 to 7%. In Mississippi, it's about 5% of kids. So according to the Division of Medicaid, it's about 30,000 kids on their rolls diagnosed with ADHD. Y'all probably know this. Nationally, about 2/3 of those kids receive medication only. In Mississippi, it's 79%. We are the highest in the nation on kids who receive medication only for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Those kids are not getting the full treatment they need to graduate from high school to make academic progress. And again, that's a very costly endeavor for us. Autism spectrum disorder. And in terms of the Mississippi Autism Advisory Committee July 2012 report, a little over 10,000 kids diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Dramatic rise, as you all know, because probably increased public awareness, but also increased public awareness is going to drive us to help fix this problem and to help these kids do well. Y'all may have seen an article in the Wall Street Journal about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's fascinating. Some European countries are taking individuals, young adults with autism spectrum disorder, and plugging them into work communities where they do very well. They're identifying these people and saying, let's try to help them and get them into jobs where they do well, where they excel. I promise you, some of these kids can do very well in jobs where they sit in a cubicle and look at numbers or do accounting, and they can better the state. You know, why are we behind some of the smaller countries in Western Europe? We need to catch up with them as well. The problems are staggering. The problems are overwhelming. The problems are, if you sit back in here this morning and listen to some of these things, you may get depressed. If so, I know a good psychiatrist. What I'd like to put forward for all of us to be thinking about for the rest of the day and for the rest of the week and for the rest of our lives is, how do we address these problems? How do we pull together and address some of these? These are a small sample of problems, but how do we address these problems? And I would put forward to y'all to think about two words: value and outcomes. We need to think about value over volume. We need to think about, how do we deliver excellent mental health care, behavioral health care, in a combination with primary health care. How do we deliver good quality care to all citizens of the state of Mississippi, especially the kids? We also need to think about outcomes. We need to think about, how do we make sure that what we're doing is actually improving these kids? You know, I'll sort of dovetail on what Andy Taggart said earlier. I'm not that smart. My grandfather said many years ago, you know, David, we Elkins, we're not that smart, but we will outwork you. And so I've taken that to heart. I tell my girls that, you know, I'm sorry, you're gifted with a very mediocre kind of dad, so you've got to work hard, girl. Outcomes means not trusting what I think works, but show me what works. Demonstrate to me what works. Show me that school attendance goes up. Show me that these kids are being treated for their mental health behavior problems that are affecting their primary health care, as Dr. Buttress talked about. Demonstrate to all of us that this is working. So value and outcomes. If we can, as a room, if we can focus on those things, I promise you, we can bring together health care and behavioral health care to help the kids of the state of Mississippi. I would love, John and Damon and I have talked about this, I would love for us, we're about the same age, I think you're younger than I am, I've got more gray hair. I would love to retire, well, tomorrow, but I'd love to retire in about 25 years or so and look back and see my state better. Because the kids that are now young, as Dr. Buttress pointed out, we've caught them early. We've understood what's going on and keeping them from getting on the trajectory of life where they'll benefit. And they're now adults, and they're improving this state as well. I'm tired of us always being made fun of. And I think the people in this room are tired as well. I think it's time for us to think about value and outcomes and how we improve healthcare delivery for kids in the state of Mississippi. So I'll leave you with those thoughts, and I think we're moving into a break now. Is that right, John? All right. Thank y'all. There's a break, and come back at 10:30.
Hey, we will, first let me just say, Dr. Buttress and Dr. Elkin, man, thank you. I hope you're beginning to see what we're trying to achieve here today, to take mental health that's functioned over here in its own silo and weave it into the direct relation, in this case, with healthcare. And if you've never read the ACE study that Dr. Buttress, and I know you all can't wait to get home and read the ACE study, but if you're a little bit of a research geek and you like that, I would encourage you to do it, because it's overwhelming, the link between those early childhood experiences and long-term healthcare experiences. So, I know we have a lot of insurance carriers and so forth in here. We want to, the graph that you show, Dr. Buttress, of the investment that we put, if we invest early in these children and their experiences, we have a long-term payoff. So thank y'all very, very much. Let's thank Dr. Elkin and Buttress one more time. All right, we are now at the break. So what we will do, though, please be back punctually. Dr. Hank Bounds is going to kick us off at 10:30. So take a break and be ready to roll at 10:30. Thank y'all. And I am delighted to welcome Dr. Hank Bounds. Dr. Bounds was appointed by the Board of Trustees of the State Institutions of Higher Learning as Mississippi's 6th Commissioner of Higher Education, July 27, 2009. And as commissioner, Dr. Bounds oversees the state's public 4-year university systems, which include the state institutions of higher learning, 4 research institutions, and 4 regional institutions. Dr. Bounds has worked to ensure more students reach the finish line to obtain their degrees. And prior to serving as commissioners, most of you know, Dr. Bounds served as our state superintendent of education, or Mississippi's public K-12 system, for 4 years. And whether he's been as a high school principal or as the Pascagoula school superintendent or the state superintendent or his current job as the commissioner. He said it looked like I jump around in jobs a lot. He said all of them very kind of important jobs, Hank, that you have done. Dr. Bounds has been a tireless leader and thought leader for children of Mississippi, and it is a great honor to introduce to you right now Dr. Hank Bounds.
Well, good morning. I'm glad to see all of you. Let me tell you that I'm going to sort of divide my remarks into about 3 areas. The first part will be sort of happy, the second part will be scary, and then the last part I'll come back and hopefully end on a positive note. So the happy part, John, you're absolutely right. We've got the right people in the room. First Lady here, Mrs. Bryant, you know, having good leadership at the top absolutely matters. Having rock stars in the field of child psychology like John and Susan and David. Having folks here with the Department of Mental Health and OSC school folks. I see, you know, my friends that sit on the bench with youth court judges, and I saw there's Senator Frazier walking in the door. And the reason that I say that, to call him out there. The reason that I point all these folks out is that I think that we all need to be very clear that this is an enormous issue. And I made lots of notes, but John, I'm not going to read all of them. I'm actually going to sort of change courses a little bit because of what was said earlier and talk a little bit about the neuroscientist that I am, Susan. I'm going to talk a little bit about where our kids are coming from in this state. And so you know that we live in the poorest state in the country. Here's what I want you to know about poverty. Susan pointed this out. I'm not a real good mathematician either, but that graph tells me that about 80% of brain development occurs in the first 4 or 5 years of life, right? We know that a child, a 5-year-old that is living in poverty does not grow up in a print-rich or a vocabulary-rich environment. That's broad stroke. That's not all cases. But on average, a child growing up in poverty has heard, on the average, 20 million fewer words than an affluent child. A person, a 20-year-old who has lived in poverty all of their life, has the same vocabulary level as a 5-year-old affluent child. And the reason I say that is because David did a really good job talking about stressors. And if you don't think arriving as a 5-year-old in kindergarten with a vocabulary level of a 2-year-old creates stress for children and for teachers and for the peers that land as a 5-year-old with an 8-year-old vocabulary. And we know that vocabulary levels of 5-year-olds are the very best predictor of future reading success. We know that. So here's the way it works for us. We get a 5-year-old that lands in kindergarten with a vocabulary level of a 2-year-old. Thousands and thousands, about 40,000 kindergartners start school every year in public schools. An enormous portion of those students start kindergarten way behind. There's the first level of stress. The other level of stress is all those things that take place elsewhere. So I'm not a mental health professional, but I have lived a life in that realm. And so as I was a high school principal and elementary principal for about 10 years, and I want to just tell you what I observed. I've had a child die in my arms. I've had more children than I can count who I have held to keep them from hurting themselves. I've had to pull a 12-year-old out of a home because her mother was selling her body for drugs, and on and on and on. So we see the things, the bigger community sees Sandy Hook and Columbine and Pearl, and all those things are awful and they get huge media attention. But what the bigger community doesn't always see is that there are all these little wars that are taking place each and every day. I'm going to read you some stats in just a minute, and that'll be the scary part, to just to help you to understand the magnitude of the issue. And I brought in a little bit of sort of educationese in terms of numbers there, so that you recognize what we're dealing with. Because those students, you know, if you start as a 5-year-old with a vocabulary level of a 2-year-old, we know that if you can't read proficiently by the end of the 3rd grade, you're exponentially more likely to go to prison, you're exponentially more likely to be a high school dropout, you're exponentially more likely to be a consumer. I mean, the cost of that for the individual is immeasurable. We can measure what that cost in the state. So we just went through a very tough time of budget cuts since about 2008 or 9. What are the 2 areas in state government that were not cut? Everybody took cuts. Higher ed took huge cuts, right? Just as a function of what was happening in the country. What are the 2 areas that didn't take a cut? Department of Corrections and Medicaid. So here's the very number one premise that I hope we'll all leave here with. It doesn't matter what the question is, the answer is education. And that doesn't necessarily mean just education in the classroom, right? So here's a scary factor about my education that I am bound and determined, Susan, to fix. I have 3 degrees in education in the state. 3 degrees. I never had a course that helped me to understand what was happening to a kid or how to identify a kid where there was real stress in their life. Here's the worst part here's even the worst part of this story. Not only did I never have a class, I never had a conversation in a class. And so one of the things that I'll be announcing fairly soon is that we're going to fix that. I had a conversation with Susan, and I just want to make certain that we get that right. And so let me just, I don't often like to read when I'm speaking, but I want to read some statistics because this will be the scary part of the conversation. The National Alliance on Mental Illness provides the following facts on children's mental health in America. 4 million children and adolescents in the country suffer from a serious mental disorder that causes significant functional impairments at home, at school with peers. Of children aged 9 to 17, 21% have a diagnosable mental or addictive disorder that causes at least mental impairment. Now here's what we know. We know that kids that grow up with other stressors, and I just talked about one of those stressors, not growing up in an environment that's print rich or vocabulary rich, and so they start way behind. So we know that in Mississippi, that percentage, 21%, is probably significantly higher. Now, I'm just telling you that from my experience of being in a classroom. When I was once the K through 12 principal in Lumberton, Mississippi. Now, you don't think of Lumberton as being, maybe if you've never been there, you don't really think of it as a poor town. When I started, here's what I observed. We didn't have a breakfast program. We couldn't keep crayons because the kindergartners were eating their crayons because they were hungry. Now, if you don't think that's a stressor that creates problems down the road, let me go to sort of a very basic mental health issue. We are all in this state really focused on improving schools. We're all very, very focused on improving the quality of teachers, right? Makes sense, right? Better outcomes, better teachers. If your child is bullied on the bus on the way to school, does learning take place that day? Does that have anything to do with the quality of the teacher in the classroom? So the point is that going back to John's great point, it really takes this village concept to raise children. And the fact that we've really got to pay attention, not just in the classrooms, but on the buses and on the playground. And so when I think about improving schools, I call it the doorstep-to-doorstep principle. And so in my experience in improving schools, what I've said to all of our folks is that We've got to look at from the time the child leaves their doorstep in the morning to the time that they arrive back in the afternoon, and put controls in place for every controllable variable, because we know that there are lots and lots and lots of uncontrollable variables. We can't control if Susie's father abused her the night before, but we can control lots of things. We can control and keep a child from being bullied on a bus. And all of those things, the more stressors that we can take out, the less that Susan and David have to deal with. The more of those things that we can move, the better. So this is just, if Hank were king for a day. You saw that line that showed how much we spend here and how much we spend here. The statistics, the research on early childhood education tells us more than we need to know about what ought to happen and where we ought to spend our money. Poorest state in the country, and we do nothing for 4-year-olds. Right? Let's do away with 12th grade, if we have to, and take that money and put it in four-year-old education. Okay, so for those football fans out there, John, I'll need to exit early.
We are now going to move to our third element here, is we're going to move from education now to economic development. And for the mental health folks in the room today, my guess is this might be your first mental health meeting where the speaker was on economic development. Is that fair? Has anyone ever heard? I've never heard an economic development speaker. So I am really excited about how Blake is going to come and begin to weave those topics together. Blake, I'm sure everyone in this room knows Blake Wilson. He's the president and CEO of the Mississippi Economic Council and serves as only the third executive of the State Chamber of Commerce in over 60 years. The key focus for MEC under Blake's leadership has been to shrink the miles that separate Mississippi and take advantage of our secret weapon, our interconnection among people. That's what we're doing here today. To make progress in education, economic development, and in our business climate and image. And from his leadership, he's developed with the Blueprint of Mississippi, Leadership Mississippi, to the Mississippi Scholars and Public Education Forum, which is fantastic, and the STAR Student Teacher Achievement Recognition Program. Mr. Wilson's leadership is indeed advancing the work here in Mississippi. So it is a great pleasure and honor to have join us here for this discussion today, Mr. Blake Wilson.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Great to see such a great crowd to talk about this important subject. I want to brag on the children. Wow, how am I doing that here? I want to brag on the Children's Home just for a minute. I knew about the Mississippi Children's Home when I was 17 years old, and I wasn't living in Mississippi. I was living in Delaware. You know, Delaware is a small state with only 3 counties, only 2 at high tide. You know, there's not much to Delaware. And I attended the University of Delaware, so that makes me a blue hen, okay? That's a fighting blue hen for those of you who are laughing, okay? You know, if you're not good, we'll scratch your eyes out. You know the cheer for the fighting blue hens? Oh, leave us alone. Well, anyway, I went to work as a newspaper reporter at a weekly newspaper in my hometown, and the editor of that paper was a man who had been placed with a family through the Mississippi Children's Home. He was from Mississippi. Reginald B. Rocky Rockwell. He is now deceased, but he gave me my start. I'm very grateful to Rocky. And Rocky was kind of a Damon Runyon-esque character, okay? He drove around at night chasing after fires and wrecks. He had a crash of the week on the front page of this weekly newspaper every week, and he said, all you got to know to be a good newspaper photographer, Blake, is set it at F11 and be there. And, you know, and by the way, I want a crash picture every week. I don't care even if it's a minor crash, I want a crash picture every week on the front page of the newspaper. So Rocky was very grateful to the Mississippi Children's Home. He was adopted by a family that was living here temporarily. They were, the father was the manager at the Hercules plant in resin plant that no longer operates. Became secretary of the Hercules Corporation. Rocky grew up in a pretty good lifestyle and was a great boss, but I spoke to him not long before he died a few years ago, and he spoke to me about the Mississippi Children's Home and said, you know, it was just a wonderful thing that he was able to get such a good start. So it's wonderful that that legacy continues to live on, and you branched into so many other things from when Rocky was young. Let me talk a little bit about economic development and this issue of children's mental health, but also education picking up. You know, Hank and I have done more road shows together than we can probably remember. And so we tag team pretty well together. And you know, he is a great leader. And it takes leadership to make a difference. And before I really get into this subject, I want to talk a little bit about leadership. You know, a problem like Katrina, a problem like the recent tornadoes, brings into focus very clearly what the risk is and what needs to be done. But a problem like children's mental health and education, they tend to be with us every day. So we become less acutely aware of the issue. It becomes almost in the background. It becomes a statistic rather than that burning issue. But think about the difference. If you read Jeff Amee's story on it, think about the difference that one person in leadership can make in setting the tone. You might have read the story about our First Lady, Deborah Bryant, who was traveling the day of the tornado, heading to an event in North Mississippi, and they needed to divert because of the risk of the tornado, and they were looking for a safe place, and they ended up being diverted to Louisville. And of course, that became right smack dab in the middle of another tornado. And she took cover. They got through the terrible storm. And at the time, the emergency management people were trying to get her back to Jackson. But she dug in and stayed there. Said, how can I help? From running to Walmart to buy whiteboards to put up so they could track all the volunteer stuff, to getting a shelter set up and getting kids settled and tucked in for the night. You see, that's the power of stepping in where people don't really expect you to step in. They expected her to be the First Lady, to be just surveying it and go back. Well, she rolled up her sleeves and got the job done. And that's what we're talking about here today. How do we take the example that the First Lady gave us in a terrible, terrible tragedy and translate that into how can we in our everyday make a difference in what is a terrible situation that we need to turn around, and that is consistent low performance. It's different. It doesn't have the same emotional wrench that the terrible sadness. If you've ever been through a disaster, if you've ever worked in the recovery from a disaster, it's hard to describe. But we have to look at our everyday lives of how do we deal with this long-term situation and turn it around. But I do think we need to pause just for a moment before we go in and talk about how we do that from an economic development point of view, and just recognize with a standing ovation this incredible First Lady who stepped up and did the job that others didn't expect to be done and made all the difference. Please stand and let's recognize Deborah Bryant. Thank you. Did a great job. So now, how do we harness that same spirit and put it to work in our own lives? I'm a business leader, okay? We're trying to find good quality employees. Why do we care about early childhood education? Why do we care about K through 12 education? Why do we care about our community college, IHL? Because we need good quality employees. Now, let me tell you, we don't get it the way you do. We're looking at the outcome. Why, when we advertise in the newspaper, can't we find enough people who can pass the drug test, who can come in and get a job, who can come in and follow the What's going on? Why can't we get it? So we're looking for the outcome. But if you talk to my leaders, they understand that we've got to do something about early childhood education in the state, that the fact that we're not getting enough kids to learn to read by the 3rd grade puts them behind forever. That's why we've gone on the road. We've talked about early education. We've supported Mississippi Building Blocks. We've supported Excel by 5. We've supported more funding for early education. But you see, we have to keep at it. Now, I want to try a little experiment. All of you are, most of you are working in this field, not in economic development, which I do, so it's a little awkward. So those guys in the room who have on jackets, I want you all to stand up. Everybody's got on a jacket. Everybody has on a jacket, stand up. Okay, I need you to take your jackets off, okay, and put them on the way you would normally put it on in the morning. Just put your jacket back on the way you would normally do it, okay? Yeah, you guys are good. I mean, you're looking good, all right? Easy, nice, simple assignment, okay. Now, take it off again and put it on starting with the other sleeve, not the sleeve you normally do, okay? The other sleeve. This is pitiful. It's just pitiful. Oh, my goodness. Do you need a little help there? Oh, my goodness. Oh, red, come on. Oh, okay, give them a round of applause, all right? What does that show us? We all get comfortable with what we do the same way over and over again, As my friend Jim Barksdale likes to say, it's an old saying, but he says it all the time. If you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you've already got, okay? And it's really true. So we have to look a little differently. And so we don't want to do things the same way. We need to step up and look for opportunities where we, as an individual, like Deborah Bryant did in Louisville, can make a meaningful difference. So you got a couple of hundred people in the room here today. Imagine if each of you went back to your communities and identified just one business leader who you may have never talked to. Maybe it's an HR person at one of your big employers. Maybe it's a CEO. Maybe it's somebody you know in church. And develop a short presentation that explains what you're trying to do and what you need them to do. Maybe it's volunteer. Maybe it's have a program in their plant that makes people more aware. I don't know what the answer is. But you see, if you do that, now we're up to, 400 people. And if you ask them, would you reach somebody else on our behalf, then you're now up to 600. And that number keeps growing until you start developing a network of pulling together. We have to do it. The economy's been down. We've had high unemployment, just like every other state in the nation. These statistics that you look at, before we get too depressed about Mississippi, are issues everywhere in America. They're more acute here in Mississippi, but they are issues. When I talk to my counterparts around the country, they're all dealing with this same issue. They're all frustrated. But by collaborating and working and finding ways to enlist people around our state. Mississippi's a great state. It's a small state, unlike my home state of Delaware, which is very small geographically. We are a small state in population, but, we're huge in geography. So the miles get in our way. And so we got to shrink those miles using our interconnections that we have to make that happen. Because this is the number one thing in economic development today, having a ready workforce. We can do all the incentives in the world. We can do all we can to promote, we've got a great climate, it's a great place to live and all that. But it boils down to this. When I bring my plant here, can I get enough qualified workers who are going to show up, be drug-free, be able to think in a linear manner, and have a safe environment? That's it. And in some parts of our state, it's more problematic than others. But in any part of our state, it's an issue. And it's an issue that's talked about. So that's why we care at MEC. But we don't have all the answers. We have very few of the answers. We just know at the end of the day, there's an issue. So my message to you today is to find ways to reach across in your communities and establish a relationship with one of your employers. And ask that employer to help you share information with others. I would not recommend coming in with a long laundry list of all the problems. We all know there are problems. But where can they help you make a difference? If you're a school administrator or a teacher, how can they make a difference in your classroom? I'll never forget when my oldest son, started first grade. The first grade teacher announced to the parent meeting, well, we're not going to be able to have any worksheets this year, no worksheets. And I said, well, why is that? Well, we can't afford the paper. This is in Delaware, by the way. This is not in Mississippi. Can't afford the paper. I said, wow, okay, well, how much paper do you need? Oh, I need a case. And I said, a case? You mean like one case of paper? You know, and I mean, to her, this is an insurmountable problem, okay? And I said, now really, you mean just like one case of paper, right? She said, yeah. I said, well, I'll have it here tomorrow. I mean, she was blown away. But what if she hadn't asked? I mean, it cost me, I think back then, $15, you know. It went to Office Depot and picked it up and brought it to the school, you know. But some of the problems that maybe to you all seem insurmountable, maybe to an employer something to say, well, sure, we can implement that. We can give that a try. We can partner with you. But I'd pick one thing. And if they can't bite on that, have another one in your back pocket that you can roll out and say, well, maybe you can help us with that. Because there is a keen interest among employers in this state, particularly at the HR level, particularly at the plant manager level or the CEO level, of helping solve this problem. Now, on the macro scale, that's where all of us as policy leaders have to come in to find a way. You know, back in 1987, this state was economically flat on its back, flat broke. We had the worst accessibility to a 4-lane highway system in the nation, the worst. We were dead last. You couldn't, I'm told, I didn't live here then, but I'm told you couldn't get from point A to point B. It was very difficult. I saw a little bit of that because when I first came to Mississippi, my oldest son was starting at Mississippi State, and Highway 25, the 4-laning was just starting on that. So, I mean, I remember those hills, you know, going up and down those hills. So I saw a little bit of that. But what happened is the leadership of that state came together and said, well, we're going to bring a 4-lane highway within 30 miles of every Mississippian, but we're not going to do it all at once. We're going to do it over a 20-year program. It was named the AHEAD program because Mississippi was behind, and we needed to move ahead. And so that program was laid out. It was a pay-as-you-go system, and little by little, the roads got built. 9 miles of highway at a time in every part of the state, every year, not connected. So if you remember, you'd be driving along, and there'd be 9 miles of 4-lane out in the middle of a vacant field, and you'd think, what crazy person is doing this, you know? But eventually, all those 9 miles came together to become a network. And we moved from dead last, 1987, to number 16 in the nation, number 5 among the blueprint states. We call it Blueprint Mississippi. Those states we compete with the most, mostly southern states. Number 5 there. And guess what? Number 1 here in the Mid-South. Now, that was an insurmountable problem, hugely expensive. You looked at the numbers in their gross status and you'd say, my God, the state's flat broke. How are we ever going to do this? But everybody came together and got on a common agenda. Now, what if we did that with education, 9 kids at a time, 9 classrooms at a time, 9 schools at a time, 9 school districts at a time, 9 counties at a time, until over a generation, we move from near the bottom to number 1 in the Mid-South. Can we do it? Of course we can. But we have to have the will. You see, we look at these things so many times as an intellectual issue. there is nothing intellectual about responding to a terrible tragedy like a tornado or a Hurricane Katrina. There's no intellectual response to that. You've got to get off your seat and on your feet and make a difference. Or you've got to say, it's not my problem, I'm going to ignore it. There is no middle ground. There is no sitting back in your armchair and say, well, now, maybe if they would consider doing this. You can't have an intellectual response. You're either in or you're out. You see, we have to translate what has become an intellectual issue on early education, on childhood mental health, on performance in our schools. We've got to take that from being an intellectual issue to being an off your seat and on your feet issue. And where do you do it? In your local community. I sat for some years on the State Commission on School Accreditation. Dr. Bounds put me on that, and then he left. But it was one of the most meaningful volunteer experiences I've ever had. And I think it was very important work, very long process. We basically would evaluate troubled school districts and make recommendations to the State Board of Education about whether that district needed to be taken over or not. And the situations were awful. How many of you know what the performance grade of your school district is in your hometown? How many of you know? Okay. There's where to start. If you don't know what your performance grade, you simply go to the Mississippi Department of Education website, look up your town, look up your school district, and you will find it like that. There's nothing to it. In some cases, you will be surprised, and I hope in some cases you will be outraged. This is where you can make a difference. But because we have an intellectual approach and look at things broadly and say, oh, well, we've got to do something about this problem, this nebulous cloud, it's different than when that tornado came down your town's main street and you see the suffering and say, we got to get off our seat and on our feet right now. We got to go to the Red Cross. We got to go to our church. We got to help. We got to step up. We have the same opportunity here. So my message is, find an unlikely partner, just like us guys trying to put on our jackets. Do it a little differently. It's awkward, it's painful, it's uncomfortable, but find a different way to do that. The great poet Robert Frost wrote, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Taking the road less traveled makes all the difference. Our First Lady proved it. She inspired others. She didn't know she was inspiring others. She didn't set out and say, well, I'm going to inspire others to do that, but she did. Your leadership can inspire others. Come on, give it a try. They can inspire others to stand up and not look the other way. Now, I'm not beating on school administrators that aren't meeting the grade. They have problems. There are issues, just like you have problems and issues in meeting your goals. I'm not saying you ought to go in there and start yelling at them, but ask them, how do we help you make a difference? And if it's not, if you don't get a response, that's when to get a little angry. That's when to get a little involved and make a difference. It's funny, my father and mother were both involved in the civil rights movement back in my home state. And the head of the movement back then, old guy, passed away a few years ago. My dad's been gone a long time. And I talked to Mr. Mitchell right before he died. And we come to the end of our conversation, said, well, hope all's well and all that. And he says, hey, Blake. And I said, well, yeah, Mr. Mitchell. He said, listen, your father and I didn't start out to be a part of a movement. Did you know that? I was a little kid when Dad got involved in all that, and I didn't really remember much. I said, well, I really don't remember, Mr. Mitchell, but I remember the day he got involved, my life changed. You know, our whole family's life changed. It wasn't a popular position back then. And he said, Blake, we didn't start to be part of a movement. We just got mad. And that was the last I ever heard from him. You know, he passed away soon thereafter. But he wanted to leave me with that message. Well, getting mad is one thing. They got involved, and their leadership and the leadership of many around the country inspired others to do good things. And today we have a different world. Your leadership can inspire others to do good things. This state has great opportunity. We have a huge Nissan plant, huge new Toyota plant, huge PACCAR engine plant in Columbus, huge new Russian steel mill in Columbus, Severstal. I just came back from the Gulf Coast yesterday. 12,000 employees building America's finest ships in Pascagoula. 12,000 people building ships in Pascagoula. We have GE building the most high-tech aircraft fan blades here in Mississippi. Well, that wasn't here 16 years ago. Shipbuilding was. But the automotive wasn't here. The steel wasn't here. They weren't here. Neither was the aircraft. How did that happen? It happened by business leaders saying, yeah, we're going to go after it. It helped with leadership. It helps with the continued leadership of our governor, who's out there working to make these things happen. A big Yokohama tire plant, boom, coming into Clay County. They looked at something like, 300 counties around the nation. I mean, how bizarre is that? And finally, thanks to the leadership of our state, our governor and the MDA, local economic developers, they made it happen and sold that plant on locating there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we can sell people on this issue, but you got to do it retail. You got to start in your communities. You've got to take that road less traveled and say, how can I, as one person, make a meaningful difference? Who am I going to try to enlist into this process? Who's going to be interested in this? And I guarantee you, any major employer, manufacturing employer particularly, is critically interested in this. There are good jobs available in our state. There are good jobs available now. They're going to be even more available as the economy picks up. Yet, employers cannot find qualified people to fill all these jobs. But we have what? A fairly high unemployment rate. What's wrong with this picture? It goes back to this issue. So we can do it. I can tell you I'm committed to it. I'm committed to it. Blueprint is committed to it. We are working on it. But it's got to be a long-range process. So we are setting up an education process that we're going to get people together and try to lay out that same kind of long-range plan that was done for highways for education. Children's mental health needs to be a part of that. Early childhood education needs to be a part of that. And we won't come to the perfect nirvana understanding, and they didn't with highways. They had to battle it out, and they had to worry about priorities, and they stumbled along, but they hung enough together that over 20 years, just drive to any other state, the border of any other state to Mississippi that's not an interstate, on one of our 4-lane highways, and what do you end up on the other state? A 2-lane. So if you don't believe that vision paid off, it did in Mississippi. We have an exemplary highway system. We need to put some money into fixing it because we didn't put any money toward maintenance, and now it's getting kind of old, so we got to fix those potholes and resurface some, but we still made a difference. So let's make it happen. Let's not focus too much on the statistics. I had some for you, by the way, and after looking at the other statistics, they're the same statistics everybody else used. I'm not going to use my PowerPoint. And look, it is important to look at that. It's important to find our mileposts, but you know what the issue is. You know that really what it is you've got to enlist somebody and get them on board. You've got to reach out to them and say, come on, let's make a difference. We can do this. And through groups like this, convenings like this, you can develop that message. You can find out, make it simple, make it easy, and then do it. The great business leader Walt Disney. I had my chairman of the board in Florida, where I was the number 2 guy. There was a guy named Eddie Carpenter. He'd come out of the University of Central Florida with a CPA degree. He was a young guy. At that time, Walt Disney was coming to the Orlando area and saying he was going to build a theme park out in the middle of a swamp, kind of a dirt road crossroads out in the middle of nowhere, out in the orange groves. And the people in Orlando thought he was crazy. I mean, you know, it wasn't what it is today. It wasn't anything close like today. And so Eddie said, well, I needed a job. I figured I'd go work for this guy for a couple of years, because it probably won't work. And then I'll go work for one of the big accounting firms. Well, of course, Eddie ended up staying there his whole career and saw and helped build that whole amazing complex that's down there now. But, you know, he was, Walt Disney, a businessman. He was also a dreamer. He wrote the lyrics for his first movies, and one of the songs that Cinderella sang, "A dream is a wish your heart makes." But he was a realist, and he said all your dreams really can come true if you have the courage to pursue them. So today, what I'm asking you to do is to have the same kind of courage that our First Lady had up there in Louisville, the same kind of courage that my parents had, 50 years ago, to take that road less traveled, the same kind of courage that it takes to make a meaningful difference. Because together, if we look at our network and just reach out just a little bit, it's something we all can do. Just find one person. If you're a pastor at a church, the Reverend Dolphus Weary deals with a lot of pastors, your influence group might be your congregation. If you're a school teacher, your influence group might be some parents. If you're a school administrator, it might be your school district and those leaders. If you're a mayor, it might be your community. So with that, let me tell you that I'm excited about Mississippi. There are many challenges in Mississippi. But having had the opportunity of lived in a few other states, I will tell you I would never come here to Mississippi ever and say to anybody, here's how we did it up north. Okay? And that's not because I fear being run out of town on a rail. It's because why would you want to do it as they did it up north? They are losing jobs. They are losing opportunities. And why? Because they're not hungry for it. It's like the old story of the tortoise and the hare. They figure they got it, but we're closing on it. We're landing. Our growth, the state of Michigan, during the last 5 years, grew at about 5% less than the rate of inflation. Mississippi grew 15% faster than the rate of inflation of the nation. Okay, why is that? Because we're doing the right things. If we keep doing the right things, we can make all the difference. So with that, folks, I'm going to close. I know we got some great messages coming at lunchtime. Look, folks, this is a great state. Don't get beaten down by the numbers. Don't feel that it's just us. It isn't just us. You will find similar numbers in Alabama. You'll find similar numbers in Arkansas, in Tennessee, in Louisiana. When you look at the blueprint states as we have, our competitor states have the same challenge. That doesn't mean it's okay. That doesn't mean, oh, well, we can ignore it. But it means, how do we find a way to move a little bit more down the road? Because over a period of 10 years, incremental progress, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, results in exponential progress over time. And if we all commit to that over a period of a few years, in one generation, if we do the right things, we can blink our eyes and say, look what we accomplished. Look what we have accomplished in the last decade in economic development in Mississippi. When I first came here, there were still little glove plants, shirt plants, low-wage, low-skilled jobs, not a lot of future. Today, we are an advanced manufacturing leader for this state, thanks to our governor. Governor, you walked in right at the right time. Governor, let's give him a round of applause. Good to have you here. and the leadership of many. So it can be done. You can turn these paradigms around. So let's make a commitment that we're going to do it. Let's put on that jacket with the other sleeve. Let's reach out to unlikely allies, and let's have the courage to make all the difference. Thank you very much.
Well, when Blake said we had to get mad, Blake, you had me at the jacket. I had surgery on my right arm, and I was determined to get it back on, and Dr. Buttress had to help me out. Wow. Blake, thank you for your tireless efforts to get it right, and as Hank Bound said, you get it. And we are very grateful. And I hope as we have listened now in healthcare, in education, economic development, that if we can take mental health out of the silo and move it into the discussion, we'll improve outcomes on all of the above. And I love, Blake, your challenge to us to reach out. Everybody in this room to go back and find that one person that you can reach out and educate. We're not lacking information. When we walk out today, we will not be lacking information. On the back of your little program, you've got plenty of statistics to sit down, but hear what Blake says. Business leaders want to have solutions to how to hire the right people, and we can be part of that solution. So, Blake, thank you very much again, very much. Y'all thank Blake Wilson one more time. Now, before I welcome Dr. Weary to the podium to bless our food. Everybody's ready for food, right? Just so, because I'll forget to tell you in a minute, the food will be, well, here it comes. It will be delivered to your table. Drinks are in the back. And but before Dolphus comes, and Blake, you said it so well, the courageous leadership of our First Lady, who does have a history of rolling up her sleeves and jumping right in. And if I could tell y'all a quick story about that, I wasn't going to say this, but when the First Lady was out at our one of our treatment facilities for kids, and we were touring around, and we went into our gymnasium where the kids had a pretty mean game of volleyball going, and then another group of kids were over here jump roping with the double Dutch big jump ropes, and the First Lady was in her high heels and said, "I want to jump." And she starts headed to the security detail, and we were all, no jump roping in high heels. And doggone, just like Blake said, she rolled up her sleeves, didn't even take her high heels off, and jumped in the middle of that jump rope and got after it, and it was amazing. And that's just the kind of amazing First Lady that we have. You want to talk about someone whose heart is all in. Some of us ask for positions, some get thrust into it. And the difference is when you do you take the platform that God gives you and make the most of it? And I am so thankful, so honored for the tireless, passionate, compassionate leadership that our First Lady shows. Y'all, she has been on an 82-county tour to read. We heard all the discussion, Dr. Buttress, and early intervention, education with Hank Bound, how critical it is these children are reading by grade 3, predictive of all sorts of things coming down the road. And our First Lady has been on a whirlwind tour of all 82, up to 46? She's up to 46 counties in our big state. And I tell you, they love the First Lady reading, but what they really love, because I've seen it, they love hugging her. And you should see these kids line up to just get a hug from our First Lady. And she won't leave till every one of them gets a hug. So we are blessed to have you, Deborah, and deeply grateful. Okay, y'all, it's not her favorite thing to do to speak, but she wants to come talk. So I'm going to get out of the way, and then they're going to serve these lunches, and then after she speaks, I'll introduce Dr. Weary, and we will eat our lunch and have a good time. Y'all please join me in welcoming our First Lady, Deborah Bryant.
thank y'all. I won't bore you for too long, but when John asked, did I want to get up and speak, of course, you know, I initially think to myself, no. But I did want to just speak for just a minute because this job as First Lady has been an incredible journey for me. And I have met the most awesome people like John and others that work with his group and other schools across this state. One thing that I've seen in my 82 county Read Across Mississippi, and I started that in January, and have had to postpone it a little bit with this tornado situation. We were actually reading, and that was our purpose. We had gone up to Smithville the day on Sunday to dedicate their town hall and to recognize their 3rd year after their tornado. And so we stayed, me and Kathy Fick, my security, and my chief of staff, Kelly, stayed because we were going to continue to read across Mississippi because we take every opportunity wherever we go to read from that point. And so we did. And what was so neat about it was the next morning when we got up, the first group that we spoke to at Smithville was a group of volunteers. And they had been given the GIVE Award. Actually, it was a nominee for the GIVE Award, but they didn't win, but they got a commendation. And so I congratulated them on that, and I encouraged them. They actually volunteered at a local nursing home, and they have found through working through that nursing home that these people are special, and they're not just old, and they're individuals, and how to value them as individuals. And I told them, you know, I want you to continue this. You're getting credits for this now in school, and I realize that. But you're learning a valuable lesson, and I want you to continue volunteerism even after you leave and touching lives. And little did I know the next day, that same day, they would have the opportunity to reach out to even more people in their surrounding communities that had been affected by the tornadoes. But we carried on from there, and we read to Smithville, we went on to Fulton. And because of the storm, we were going to go on to Tishomingo, I believe, county from there, and Columbus, and spend the night and read back. And we ended up, because they were letting school out early, that we would not interfere with that in any way. And so we left and we came home, and that's when we ended up in Louisville. And, you know, I didn't do any different than any of you would have done. Once we were there and the situation happened, you just jump in and you do whatever you can do. And I was just grateful that when I asked what I could do, because in my mind I was thinking search and rescue, and I was praying, Lord, how you got to help me with this one, because I'm not emotionally prepared for this. But they gave me the task of setting up shelters, and that was pretty easy compared to what we had. This Read Across Mississippi, I wanted to mention that to you because I have gotten to touch and go into so many schools and touch many children, because now that the schools have caught on, I've hugged as many as 420 children in one school. And when I hug them, I look them in the eye because I want them to see that I want to touch every one of them. And that's what I tell them. I said, I'm going to hug you because I have to touch every one of you before I leave here. And I try to look them in the eyes. Now, I have maybe, of that 420 children that I hugged that day, I might have had 5 children that kind of did that, and then I kind of hug them and I say, well, I'm not going to let go till you hug me back. So, but I feel like, you know, that might be the only hug that child gets. And I want them to know it's okay to let themselves go and receive a hug, or an appropriate hug, of course. You know, but I mean, you know, to let them know it's okay, that they can reach out and they can love other people. And I encourage them, and I don't just go read. I do several things while I'm there. And I tell them, I try to give them lessons about our state, tell them a little bit about our state, tell them about who we are, because I tell them I think it's important they know the person that's reading to them. So I make a personal connection with them. And sometimes, and I see these children, I can pick out the ones that are autistic, that's mixed in the classrooms now. I can see when children are reading to me in unison, this one over here is not really reading. They're just mouthing and kind of catching every other word. And it gives me an opportunity to talk to the teachers and say, did you notice that child? You know, maybe you need to pull him aside and let him read to you by himself. Because it's the little things that you notice and the little things that you can do that can really make a difference. And sometimes people might not even think of that. So I just get the most incredible blessings out of traveling around this state, and that's why I do it. I mean, hopefully I'm blessing others. Hopefully I may change one child's life, but I'm receiving all the blessings. So I ask you as businesses too, because I've noticed as I've read across Mississippi, there are some counties that I go to and some schools that I go to that are so poor. I never know, and I want them to be able to take educational field trips. And I look at them and I think, they'll never get out of this county. And y'all, that's so sad. So I encourage businesses, adopt a school, pay $25 a child to get them to come to the governor's mansion or the new Capitol or the old Capitol or somewhere educational. I tell them about the Stennis Space Center, the Infinity Center, that they can learn so much. How do you know you're not going to spark one child that wants to go into the field of science and mathematics and get in the space field? I mean, it's just touching that child, giving them the opportunity to see something outside of that community. So I do encourage you, I challenge you, every one of you in here today, what can you do as an individual that can then make a difference in a child's life? And it's going to be just picking one little thing at a time and getting a snowball with it until we affect every child. And it's going to take a lot of hard work, and it's going to take every individual in this state doing one positive thing. And we get busy. And I'm just saying, folks, we are busy. But let's make our busyness about helping the children of our state. They are so important, and they're our future. Thank you so much.
First Lady, thank you so very much. We are not blessed, are we? We are so blessed. All right, before you chew your arm off, I want to ask Reverend Dolphus Weary to come up. I think everyone here is aware of the impact this man has had on our state. And I am just, he's a hero to me. And I know for the last 30 years, Dr. Weary has worked on racial unity, service to the poor. He's got bachelor's degrees, 2 master's degrees, doctoral degree, and I learned 4 honorary doctorate degrees. So this prayer is really anointed. I'm just letting you know. And he is the former executive director and president of Mission Mississippi and the founder of Real Christian Foundation that shares the message of faith and hope in rural communities. And to provide our invocation today, please help me welcome a true hero of Mississippi, Dr. Dolphus Weary.
I started telling him, I'm not to speak, I'm just here to pray. All right. Deborah, thank you so much for your heart and what you shared. Let's pray. Father, you're good to us. And thank you, Lord, for helping us to learn how to be good to each other. I thank you for this summit because for so long in our state it's been silent. We've been silent on some things, and we've been silent on mental health. And Lord, I thank you that we're silent no more. Bless this summit, bless every speaker, bless what they'll take from here and use in their communities. And Lord, I just pray that you will guide. Now, Father, I just pray that you'd bless the food as we share it together. In a world of hunger, you have prepared food for us, so help us to be thankful for it. Bless the food as we share it. Bless our time and bless the rest of this conference. And Lord, may we leave here energized on going and do more for the least of these. We'll be so careful to say thank you. In Jesus' name. Amen.
You know, and as you watch the governor, not only is our chief executive in a time of crisis, but the compassion like Deborah that just flows to Mississippi's people. We are just so blessed, and I know you've got an incredibly busy today, Governor, and we just thank you very much for being here. You know, thanks to his visionary leadership, Mississippi continues. We've talked about a lot of challenges we've had, but Mississippi's also continued to be a national leader in innovative practices. From expanding healthcare access and telehealth partnerships to growing our workforce in the healthcare community, Governor Bryant has aggressively advanced the expansion of healthcare and economic development in our state. And I am thankful, very thankful, to serve a governor whose heart is towards children. From reducing the rates of our state's teenage pregnancies and incarcerations, increasing children's educational performance and graduation rates that we heard Dr. Bounds talk about, there is congruence between public policy and his compassion for a better tomorrow for our students. So it is an honor and a privilege, very grateful to introduce to you the Honorable Governor Phil Bryant.
Thank you all. Oh, please be seated. Now, I will know from now on, John, not to follow the First Lady. As she told you that Sunday afternoon, we had returned from Smithfield, Mississippi, and where we had helped open their city hall from being totally destroyed by EF5 tornado 3 years ago. I began to look at the weather as we were driving back because I had left her there. And just as yesterday, we were talking to some of the executive security detail, and I was asking them how on earth did she get on top of a house in Louisville, Mississippi. It's not the safest place that you want your wife, is tarping a roof. And the head of the security detail looked at me and he said, "Now, Governor, you know I can't control her any more than you can." I said, I understand, Lee. You're absolutely right. This is a lady that was traveling home, as she said, and happened to be passing through a small town called Louisville that we, quite honestly, didn't know a whole lot about. We know a lot about Louisville now. And Deborah knows a lot about it, and they know everything about her. And I think you've been able to see from her commitment and her desire just why I have had some moderate success in life. Because I married her. Because the same compassion and determination she has to help others, she's had to help her family and to help her husband. Now, she has set about to make sure that Mississippi is the very best it can be. And I think she's doing a remarkable job. Thank you, Betty. John is right. We have had a busy several weeks, but I can tell you something that you may not get to witness personally. Many of you have. Dr. Buttress, we were talking about, John was talking about it, is the compassion and determination of the people of the state of Mississippi to help people they do not know, people they've never seen, people that they just hear about. It is remarkable to see the volunteers from all over America that are coming to Louisville and Tupelo to pitch in. Samaritan's Purse that Deborah's been working with. There's a group of veterans called the Rubicon Team. And these veterans come together and they go to the disaster, to the sounds of the guns, as they say. To help rebuild. It's been remarkable to see our people. Today at 1 o'clock, we'll call the legislature back in session. That's a formality to help with the financial portion of our responsibility. The federal government is doing theirs. We must step up and do ours. But it will pale in comparison. Even the $20 million will pale in comparison to the gifts that we have received. Last night I spoke in Memphis, and people all across the country came up and said, "We've been seeing what's happening in Mississippi." And it's remarkable that we hear time after time people who have lost everything say, "I am so lucky. God has been so good to us because we got out alive. My family is not hurt." That doesn't happen just everywhere. So these wonderful people that we know continue to struggle, but they will rebuild. They have buried their dead. They will continue to mourn. But one helping another will rebuild their cities, their towns, their communities. And they will be better than before. As we were moving in a modular hospital for the first time, a full hospital, the emergency rooms and x-rays and testing facilities into what was a concrete slab about 3 days earlier. I was standing there with the city engineer, and he said, you know, we really got to find someone to give us permission to clear this off. I said, who owns the building? They said, the county does. I said, clear it. If anybody asks you, tell them the governor told you to move it. He looked over and said, Frank, crank the tractor. He said, Governor, that's all I need. That hospital is up. It is there. And it's an amazing feat to see that type of manpower, that type of personnel, those types of materials be moved from North Carolina here. But it is being done by your fellow Mississippians. Now, they don't ask what neighborhood you live in or what you do for a living and what political party you're in, what church you go to. They ask, do you need our help? More than likely, they'll say, can we help you? That's all that is taken. So we've got work to do. And there are children out there that are hurting. Deborah and I visited Sunday afternoon some of the children at Blair Batson. It was particularly a young 4-year-old girl you may have read who was in a nursing home. The lady who owned the nursing home gave her life to save this girl, this wonderful child. You can tell by talking to her the trauma that she has gone through and will go through. She will need our help, both from a physical standpoint and an emotional one for some time. Now, I would just dare say that in Louisville, Mississippi, and the small area outside of Louisville in which they live, probably do not have the professionals necessary to provide the emotional help that that child will need. So the collaborative program that we're working so hard on with the University Medical Center, the telemedicine portion, I was just speaking this morning to Hugh Mina about their new fiber to home and fiber to business broadband capabilities that will be better, 100 times better and faster than what we know now. No other state in America is doing that. 1,000 gigabytes. Now, I'm not sure how fast that is, but nobody else is faster. That's all I wanted to know. Nobody's faster than us. So we all have to be 100 times faster. But it will help us. It will help make sure that we get that image, that information from that professional, that mental health or emotional professional at the University Medical Center to that child, perhaps outside of Louisville, Mississippi, or the closest home health care, children's home center that they can reach, or home health care center that they can get to. But that's not enough. I mean, the University Medical Center and the Children's Home Services working together is remarkable. That hasn't happened at the extent that it's happening now. But obviously, we need to work stronger with the Department of Mental Health, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Education. We need, if you will, a children's cabinet. As I said here today, I thought it would be my job as governor to create this children's cabinet to pull everyone together, both in and outside of government, that can work on issues relating to children and their mental and emotional health. Well, I think I can do that. I'm almost certain that the Constitution will allow me to form a children's cabinet here in the state of Mississippi. So I wish I could tell you more details, but I just thought of it. It just happened listening to the First Lady. I just realized that we need to get everybody together, not only on one afternoon, not only on one day, but throughout the years. So next week, after we get off storm duty for a little while, I'll start working on that. And John, you're going to help. And William, I'm going to call on you to help. And Dolphus, I'm going to call on you to help. All of you get ready, because we've got a job ahead of us. You see the numbers on the back. There was just an article in today's paper about autism. The rate of autism has skyrocketed 381% in Mississippi. We've got to find out why. If you get a 381% increase, something is terribly wrong. Now, I'm not a scientist or medical doctor, but I know some, and I know some great ones. And we've got to put whatever it takes into an effort to determine why that's happening. Now, you've heard Blake Wilson, and nobody does it better. Nobody's a better cheerleader. Nobody articulates the vision for the state of Mississippi from an economic development standpoint than Blake Wilson does. I try as I might, as I get excited about it. The opportunities that we see in Mississippi, the goals that we have surpassed and then reset for us is just remarkable. Being governor, it's exciting when you see a Yokohama Tire Company. It's exciting when you see SpaceX that will put man on Mars one day coming into the state of Mississippi. It's exciting when a homegrown company like C-Spire says we're going to do it 100 times faster than anybody else. These are remarkable times for us. But our workforce, as I spoke to a CEO yesterday, he said, I love Mississippi. One of our major manufacturing facilities are there in Mississippi. But we're worried about the workforce of the future. He was honest with us. And so were we. So were we. Because of some of the problems that you deal with every day, at least 50% of the children that have a behavioral emotional problem are dropping out of school. They won't have the opportunity that many children have. They will not be able to obtain that job at a high-tech industry. They will not be the successful lifestyle or have the successful lifestyle that we all wish every one of these children to be and to have. So we've got a lot of work to do. Now, Mississippi has come a long way, but in children's health care, in their mental behavioral health care, we lag behind. We're going to change that. And we don't have a decade to do it. We're going to do it in warp speed. We're going to do it 100 times faster. We're going to do it with 1,000 gigabytes. We've got to. That's our responsibility, our duty. And these children need a future, a bright and happy future. And reaching to them now at the professional level that I know that we have in this room can change those lives for all the better. We are going to do that. First Lady and I are pledged and committed ourselves to be a part of that. And we know you have. I will make my way to the Capitol now, if you'll forgive me, because we have important work ahead of us today. But believe me, nothing is more important than what you're doing here today. The future of the state of Mississippi depends on your hard work. I know you're going to be successful. John, thank you so much. God bless you all.
As the governor speaks, there's a Greek proverb to what he was saying earlier about we don't have time. There's a Greek proverb that says a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit. I'd like to see our kids sit in the shade while we're still working, right? We don't have that much time. And we are blessed to have the leadership that you've heard today across the state of Mississippi lock arms to say we want to get it right. And I am excited. I really am. It's going to be hard work. I get that. But as Dr. Buttress and Dr. Elkin have said, as Hank Bounds has said, as Blake Wilson has said, and has Andy Taggart charged us with great courage. That we get a little angry, we get a little fire, and then we go out and make it happen. And I don't want to overuse this phrase, but it's true. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? I believe we have all the ingredients to make this cake right. I really do. And it starts with the people in this room. And so I am just thankful for you taking time to be here today. Thankful for our leaders taking time to, in the midst of a crisis, our governor to be here today to say this is a priority. And we're blessed. He's right. We have the people. That's the most difficult ingredient. We've got the right people. And I believe we can do it. And I am excited. And as we have seen the statistics, 1 in 5 children with a serious mental health problem, and yet 4 of those 5 with a problem do not receive treatment. If I stated that statistic saying children had cancer, 1 in 5 children had cancer, but 4 of the 5 of those with cancer don't get treatment, we would have an outcry. It's time to change the dialogue. And that's why you're here, because 1 in 5 of the future healthcare leaders and 1 in 5 of our future educators, I'm taking them from children to adults now, and 1 in 5 of our future business leaders need our help right now. So, I am thankful for the partnerships that are in this room, the partnerships that I hope will form from this room. I don't know about you, but as the governor was talking about the children's cabinet, I'm pretty excited about that. A little nervous he just called my name, but I'm really excited about that. So I just want to thank you for being here and making this a priority today. To the speakers, oh, wow. Have we not had just a fantastic panel? If y'all would help me give the speakers all another round of applause. To our partners at the Department of Mental Health, thank you very much. And again, Diana, congratulations. And you have our full support, and we're just excited to work with you. And the Mississippi University Medical Center, Dr. Buttress and Elkin, and the wonderful resources that we have in our state. It's the state's only children's hospital. Thank you for partnering. And to all of you for being here today. And if I could just take one quick point of privilege, which I hate to do, but if I could just thank my staff for putting this together, in particular the lady right there, Kim Williams. If you get a chance to just come by and tell her thank you, the reason you had food, the reason you had a name tag, and the reason that we had slides that I forgot to advance, but they were there, is because Kim's hard work. So if you could just help thank them as well, that'd be great. The governor's gone to do important work. Deborah, thank you. Thank you for who you are and for what you do and the congruent way that you live your life. We are just blessed, and I know that you and your husband have been placed where you are for such a time as this. So thank you very much. If you would, what I hope to do this time next year, because Mental Health Day will come around every year, right? So a couple things that I'd like to do in preparation for next year and gathering again. One is I want to get you all an email with a little survey monkey. What was good, what was not, what would you like to see different, what would you like to see next year, so we can get it right, okay? So most of you, we have your email. Some of you, we do not. So if we do not, if you didn't send that, there's a piece of paper in front of you. Just write your email, leave it on the table. We'll get it, but I really want to get your feedback about how do we make this better and what we can focus on in the years to come. So thank you for that, and I hope, I'm excited about reconvening again this time next year with you, and I just appreciate all the great work that you do to help change the lives of our children and families. Thank y'all. Y'all have a great day.